make it so that your application takes longer to be reviewed and approved. So we want to cut down on those errors as much as possible. So first is not providing enough experience for the qualifying party. Either it's too vague or it's not hitting on the classification that's being applied for. The second is a couple of issues with the bond, which we'll go over in more detail. The third is forgetting to submit government-issued IDs for everyone that's on the application. The fourth is the qualifying parties testing not being submitted or being too old. And the fifth is background checks not being submitted for everybody that's on the application, or background checks that are older than 90 days old being submitted. So just to give a brief overview of what our agency does in case you're not familiar, we're a cabinet level agency that reports directly to Governor Ducey. Our mission is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public through a regulatory system designed to promote quality construction by Arizona contractors. We've been introduced to most of the department heads in this meeting, and so we have licensing that reviews license applications, approximately 4,000 a year. We also maintain those licenses once they're issued. So if you have any changes you need to make to your license, updating the company name, updating ownership, that you do that with the licensing department. The compliance department investigates any complaints against both licensed and unlicensed contractors, and they recommend citations. And then finally, the legal department supports licensing and compliance, and they direct cases through the administrative process, and then they also oversee the recovery fund. So the first step in applying would be submitting your license application. Currently, 90% of the new license applications are submitted through our online portal. The portal can be accessed by you at any time. It does not need to be during our business hours. So if you need to submit your application at 7 p.m. at night, you can do that. And then you can also work on maintaining your license on the portal once that license is issued. Again, like I talked about, any changes you need to make, you can do that on the portal. And the first step to accessing our portal is creating an account. So there's some information that's required to make your account on the portal. We're going to go over that so you're aware of that when you go and make your account. So you need to identify an authorized representative for your portal account. That can be you. If it's just you running your business, that can be you. If you want your wife or spouse to do that, they can be your authorized representative. If you have an employee that's going to take care of that, that could be them. It's really up to you. We would need to know their name, date of birth, an email address, how they want to be contacted, and then some security questions if you ever need to reset your password. And then we're also going to know some information about the business entity that is applying. So that's the type of entity, whether it be an LLC, a sole proprietorship. If it's an LLC or corporation, we need to know the Arizona Corporation Commission file number. We need to know for the company, and then other contact information like an address and phone number.
So then another way to think of the authorized representative is it like the administrative assistant, or it's you. And regardless of who that admin assistant is, it's who are you allowing, if not you, to make changes to your license account. So that's the information we need under the authorized representative. And then Marley, you covered the business entity beautifully.
And so our portal is found online on our website at roc.az.gov. And it's right here on the homepage under My Account. That is where you're going to go to make your account and then be able to access the portal once that account is created. And so the next step is determining who the applicant is. So we already discussed some applicant entity types. And so there's a sole proprietorship or a partnership. We need to know the name of that entity, and that's the name exactly as it appears on your government issued ID. We need to know if it's a corporation or LLC, it needs to be the name exactly as it's listed at the Arizona Corporation Commission. And if you're unsure of what that name is or what your entity ID is, you can easily find that online at Arizona Corporation Commission's website. They have a search function where you could type that in to find that information. And then if it's a trust that's applying, the name needs to be listed exactly as it is on the trust certificate.
And an opportunity here to explain to you, if you're so we get about 200 to 250 new residents to Arizona every single day. Knowing that licensure varies around. Most states do have licensure regarding construction contractors. We do, and so in Arizona, we do it a little bit differently than most states do. Um, I come from Ohio. I know it's different there. In Texas, I believe they license individuals. In Arizona, though, we license a business entity and then any actual bona fide employee, so usually that means a W 2 employee, is able to work under that license without also requiring a license themselves. So what Marley's describing to you is that the business entity itself is what holds the license. So the LLC is what we actually license. We don't license you as an individual. So if you are applying as a sole prop, then you would have to put the name exactly as it appears on your ID. If you're applying as a corporation or an LLC, then it's exactly as it's in CorpCom. If it's a trust, then exactly as it appears on the trusted certificate. So it's just those nuances that we want you to understand going into this, and that impacts how you fill out the application.
So this step is optional, but if you want to have a DBA or doing business as, you would include this information on your application. Your DBA is going to be reviewed during the application process to make sure that we can approve that name. So both your company name and your DBA can't advertise a scope of work that you're not being licensed to do. So that is part of our review. And this is a recommendation, but it's not required, that you register your DBA name with the Arizona Secretary of State. And you can add a DBA later if you don't want to do it right now. You can remove it or change it over time for any of your licenses. And it's just another way to advertise your name by having an additional DBA that you can use.
An example of this is I might have a company called AAA Cactus LLC. That doesn't really tell you much about what I do, but my DBA could be AAA Cactus Plumbing and Electrical. That would require two different licenses to actually get that DBA, but it gives you a sense of how that operates. The DBA can be used as a name to describe what your company does, as opposed to the actual company entity name itself.
The next step is figuring out what license classification you're going to be applying for. So we have three main classifications: residential, commercial, or dual. So this is just going to depend upon what type of work you want to do. If you only are going to do residential jobs, you're going to want to get a residential only license. If you want to do both residential and commercial, you'd want to look at getting a dual license so you can do both. And then under that, there are general contracting licenses, special or subcontracting licenses, and engineering licenses. Okay. And each license is required to have a qualifying party. Your qualifying party is going to be the person that qualifies for the classification that's being applied for. They need to show experience for that specific classification. They need to take the trade exam for that classification, and they need to take the statute and rules exam. All of our licenses require that the qualifying party take the statute and rules exam. We have a few licenses where if they have enough experience, they don't need to take the trade exam, but most of them do require a trade exam. We'll link a spreadsheet that shows you what's required for each license when it comes to testing and which ones have that the ability to have the experience be in lieu of the trade exam. That will be linked in the chat so you can see that. But for experience, we are going to want to know the dates of employment, how many hours they worked there, their position or title, and a detailed description of the duties, especially as it relates to the classification being applied for. So some people focus on, I did payroll and office management. That's great, but if you're applying for a painting license, we want to see either hands-on painting experience or managerial experience, so supervising other people doing painting or whatever the trade is that's being applied for. Really be detailed and focus on that specific classification. You don't need to give that kind of outside information if it doesn't relate to the classification. And then we also are going to need at least one reference that can attest to the qualifying party's experience. They need to have direct knowledge of what that qualifying party did. And it cannot be someone that's named on the application, but it could be a former supervisor, could be a coworker or a client if that client has direct knowledge and saw a qualifying party performing that work. And then we'll also need the qualifying party's name, exactly as it's listed on their government issued ID. The most common form of ID we get is a driver's license. It can be a driver's license from another state if that's where the qualifying party's driver's license is, but it must be an active ID. It can't be an ID that expired. Passports work as well. We need to know their date of birth and social security number, contact information, so address, phone number, email, their title that they have. It's going to be qualifying party, but if they're also a member or an owner or have some other capacity at the company, we want to know that position name as well. If they have any ownership, and then like we mentioned earlier, everyone on the application needs to submit a background check. We have a link on our website to background checks because we have a specific vendor that we use, and everyone will need to submit that background check, and it must have been taken within 90 days of us receiving the application.
And we do have a question from Mr. Martin about any list or recommendations for test preparation. So we use an outside vendor. The vendor is called PSI, and they actually administer our exams. They do have, I guess I would call it a very limited preparation for you in the candidate bulletins for each classification. And what it does is it gives you a list of 5 example questions as to what you might see in the exam. But then it also provides you the references for any material that's used to pull questions out of. We do have the exams are open book, and you're welcome to take any of those listed references into a testing facility. So yeah, that would be my best answer there. Obviously, there are some independent and private schools out there that you can find. We as a government agency just can't make recommendations on private companies. I'm sure you understand why. But you're welcome to use those. You're welcome to just use the bulletin with the references. The statute and rules exam, you're able to use the statutory book that we have available on our website. And so, yeah, I hope that answers, or at least helps answer for you, Mr. Martin. So it's probably not the answer you wanted, but that's the best answer we can actually give as a government agency. Whether you want to cover waivers?
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at. Does someone want to answer that question? Okay.
Yep.
So so we have in-state waivers and out-of-state waivers. So in-state waivers, if your qualifying party or yourself, if you're the qualifying party, has been named on an Arizona license within the past 5 years, the statute and rules exam can be waived. That license needs to have been active within the past 5 years. You needed to have been the qualifying party in the past 5 years, but the statute and rules exam can be waived. The trade exam can also be waived as long as the qualifying party was on the same classification within the past 5 years and that license was active. So that needs, for Arizona in-state waivers, it needs to have been the same classification in order to waive the trade exam. For out-of-state waivers, statute and rules exam cannot be waived because that is Arizona specific. The qualifying party would need to take that exam. But the trade exam can be waived if the qualifying party was on a comparable license within the past 5 years. We have an out-of-state waiver form that you will send to the other board in the state where you were licensed. They will fill it out and send it back to us, and then we will do review to make sure that those licenses are comparable. If we determine it's comparable, then the trade exam can be waived as well as the experience requirement. Sorry, I should go back to in-state waivers. Experience can also be waived within that same criteria if you're on the same classification in Arizona as well.
And yeah, you're right. We do have a question from Gilbert, and it relates to he lives in Colorado, plans on doing work here. He's hoping to, I believe it's become the general contractor. He has a electrical license in Colorado. So just as it applies to what Marley just talked about, if you were looking to transfer that electrical license or get an electrical license rather down here, we would likely look at whether we would be able to waive that electrical exam for you for a general contractor. We do have various levels of general contractors as classifications. So really depending on the actual type of work, whether it's commercial, dual, or residential, and what dollar amount, that's going to change what classification you may want to apply for. So we'll get into it, but I would just recommend that you contact either Marley or Jacqueline, and they'd be more than happy to walk you through the nuances with the scope classifications of the general contractors.
Okay, so in addition to the qualifying party, there are other people that must be named on the application. So if it's an LLC, we need any owners of 25% or more. And if it's a member managed LLC, we need all members. And if it's a manager managed LLC, we need all managers. If you're not sure how your LLC is set up, that information is on the Arizona Corporation Commission's website. When you search your company, there's documents in there that specify that. And then that will let you know if we need members or managers or both. If it's a corporation, we need all officers. So that includes president, vice president, and any other functional equivalent of these officers. We also need all owners of 25% or more, and any directors. For a corporation, we need all of those people. And this information is required by statute.
And Gilbert, just to follow up on your question, so you are electrical in Colorado and you want to do general contracting work in Arizona. There are exceptions to allow you to actually apply for and be on both, and we'll get into those a little bit later, so that you would be able to general contract, subcontract. You wouldn't have to subcontract the electrical, because electrical, plumbing, boiler work, and HVAC, none of that is allowed to be done directly by the general contractor. It has to be subcontracted. But again, there are exceptions to allow you to apply for and hold both licenses to allow you to do both the work. And we'll touch on that a little bit. But again, you can follow up with Marley or Jacqueline on having an actual explanation of how a QP can be on multiple licenses.
Okay, and then this does not apply to all entities, but it does apply to some. So if your corporation or LLC is owned directly by other corporations or LLCs or trusts just in their entity, we would need this tiered entity chart so that we can see the ownership, and so that we can capture all owners of 25% or more. So this is an example of what that chart would look like, of what we're looking for. We have these instructions on our website. And we would need all addresses of the entities that own the applicant. We need a background check and government issued ID for any people that are on here that have ownership of 25% or more. And we need this attestation down here to be signed by an authorized representative. Tiered entity charts can get complicated. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can walk you through that. Look at your specific situation. This is just a general example. We also will pre-approve these org charts or these tiered entity charts if you email our licensing department. We will look at that and we'll send back either approval via email, and then you'll know that your chart is good to go and be submitted with your application. Or if we find any corrections, we'll go over that with you. And this way it speeds up your application process and we're not waiting on corrections once the application is received.
And I know one of the bigger deficiencies is you can see it in the bottom right-hand corner. It is an attestation that no person or entity other than those listed owns 25% or more of the applicant. And it's just a deficiency because it's missing that simple signature attesting to that fact. So just point that out to make sure you don't forget about it.
So as we discussed, there's certain people that need to be listed on the application. We're going to need some information for them. Same as qualifying party, we need their name as it's listed on their government issued ID, their date of birth and their social security number, copy of a government issued ID that is current, a residential or business address, phone number, email, their title or position, the percent of ownership that they own of the applicant, and a background check that is 90 days. That is not 90 days or older. And then each person on the application however you're submitting it via mail or on the portal, is going to need to attest to some disclosures. So we need to know if anybody on the application has been on a prior license that has been revoked or has a suspension. We need to know if anybody on the application has received a citation or a conviction for unlicensed contracting. And we need to know if anybody on the application has a felony conviction or a pending felony charge. Any of these being true is not an automatic denial of the application. They'll be reviewed by our legal department and our licensing department. If more information is needed, we'll reach out to you, but some of these applications would go through review with the Good Character Committee to see if the license can be granted.
And I really want to stress here, criminal history is not it does not preclude you from obtaining a contractor's license. As Marley said, there's a Good Character Committee that we have at the agency. Marley's going to go through a little bit of what the requirements are if you have a felony conviction, but I can tell you that 88% of felony applicants who have applied, 88% receive a license. So again, it is not a prohibitive condition. So apply, get us the information that we need, and all likelihood is that a license will be issued.
So if someone has a pending felony charge or conviction, these documents would need to be submitted with the application. So that's the indictment or complaint, the court's findings or plea agreement, the pre-sentence report, documentation of the sentence, completion of the sentence, and then if applicable, any satisfaction of restitution and an order restoring civil rights. You're welcome to submit optional documents too if you feel that it's needed. This could be a letter of explanation about what happened, letters of reference, a completion of any training or programs that you went through, and then any personal or professional achievements.
Thank you, Marlon.
Okay. So bonds, as we discussed in the beginning, this is something that has quite a few errors, and it's one of our biggest deficiencies for new applications. We want to make sure everybody understands what's needed. So there are 3 types of bonds that you can submit. Every license is required to have a bond. There's no exemption to this. So you could either submit a surety bond, a cash bond, or an assigned certificate of deposit. Surety bonds are a most common type of bond that people use, and you will use a bond company. Essentially, you'll pay them a premium. They will issue the bond on our bond form, and that will be tied to your license. A cash bond is where you just pay us the full bond amount, and that will be there to cover the license. And then a certificate of deposit is something you'll get through a bank. There's some paperwork that you'll submit to the bank and then us to cover the license as well. There are minimum bond amounts that need to be held by the license. This depends on your annual volume of work and the classification that you have. So on the next slide, we'll look at a breakdown on how to figure out that amount. But depending on these 2 factors, your bond amount might be different than a bond that another company has.
And in construction, we often have, as you know, something called a completion bond. This is considered a license bond. It would act largely similar if a complaint came in for either non-payment or for damage done to a homeowner or a commercial owner. It would act in the same way. It would pay out, but it's significantly less than what a completion bond would be. And we'll see that on this next screen.
Okay. So this first column is broken down by license type. So once you figure out what classification you want to apply for, if you're just getting a general residential license, maybe our B license, you would look at this first line. Then you're going to need to estimate on your own what your gross volume will be. If it's a less than $750,000, you would need to get a minimum $9,000 bond. If it's going to be more than that, you need to get a minimum of a $15,000 bond. You don't need to submit any documents to us about how you calculated this volume. It's just something that you do on your own. And then at any time, maybe if you want to start out with a higher bond, you can do that. And then, after you've been working for a while, if you have a better idea about your annual volume, you can submit a bond rider, and we can, the bond company would send that to us. We decrease the bond amount. still needs to be at that minimum bond amount, but you can change your bond amount at any time. You just work with your bond company, or if you have a cash bond, you would work with increasing that cash bond amount. So you can contact us at any time if you have questions about your bond or what bond amount that needs to be. For our dual licenses, you will have to add from the commercial and residential section on this form, and so that's that paragraph to the right is showing you how to calculate that. So if you're a commercial specialty contractor, you're going to look down here. If you do $150,000 or less, then for the commercial side, it's $2,500 for your coverage. And then to calculate the residential amount, that's that second part. Residential specialty contractor, less than $375,000. You have that $4,250. Add that up. That's your bond total.
All right. And one of the things on your bond is, though we require the minimum, and that's added up as Marley is describing, on the bond, it does have to specifically break out. If you are a dual contractor, your bond needs to specify what bond amount, what penal sum is assigned to commercial work, and what penal sum is assigned to the residential work. So they do have to be specified separately on the actual bond document. But again, they do have to add up to the minimum requirements listed in that chart. Okay.
To Leanne's question about the minimum bond for residential handyman, that's probably going to be one of our specialty residential licenses. We have an R62 license, which is for small home improvements. And so the minimum bond amount for one of those licenses would be $4,250. Okay, so if you're going to be using a surety bond, which, like I said, is one of the most common types of bonds that we have, you're going to need to use our bond form. This is found on our website. The bond form will get sent to your bond company. Most of them are familiar with this form, but if they have any questions, they can reach out to us. And the bond company is going to assign a bond number to you. They'll need to put this bond number on the form. The full legal name of the applicant. So this is the entity's name. If you're an LLC, it's the LLC's name needs to be on there. And if there's a DBA, that also needs to be on there. The license classification and description needs to be on the form. So if you're not sure what the description is, you can find this on our classification part of our website, but you can also contact us for this information. But for instance, if it's a KB2, it needs to spell out KB2, dual residential and small commercial, because that is the official description for that license. Like Jim talked about, the penal sums need to be broken out. How much is covering residential and how much is covering commercial, because your residential customers would only have access to that residential amount of the bond. Same applies with commercial. That's why it needs to be broken out so that we know how much is available to that specific customer. And then the bond company needs to assign an effective date to the bond, and they need to put the date that the bond was signed. The effective date of the bond cannot be older than 6 months old when the application is received. So if you got a bond a year ago and you're applying now, you would need to submit a full force and effect letter from the bond company saying that that bond is still in effect. We need a signature.
The other thing with that, Marley, is the effective date has to be before you apply, correct? Because we cannot issue a license unless the bond is effective. So
Correct.
Understandably, you don't want to waste money paying premiums, but we can't actually issue a license until the effective date of that bond. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yes. And then an authorized rep on the application needs to sign the bond and sign with their title on the bond. On our form, there's a section for that. Then the bond company needs to get the bond notarized for the signature of the attorney in fact, and the bond company needs to put their official seal on the bond. So workers' compensation, this is another requirement. Everybody that's applying needs to show in some way that they're in compliance with workers' compensation. We don't regulate workers' compensation, but we are required by law to make sure you are in compliance. But the Industrial Commission of Arizona is the agency that oversees workers' compensation. So if you have specific questions, I'd reach out to them. If you have questions about If you're exempt, reach out to them, get that information from them. They have provided to us a couple ways of being in compliance. One is giving us your policy number and the company issuing your workers' compensation. If you're filling this out on the portal or on our paper application, there's a spot on the application just to type this in. We don't need that certificate necessarily as long as you provide us this information, but you're welcome to send that certificate as well. If you are self-insured, we need proof of self-insurance, and I know the Industrial Commission has more information about how to be self-insured. And then there are a couple of exemptions for companies that don't have any employees. Like if you're a sole proprietorship with no employees, you can check that you're exempt. If you're a single member LLC with no employees, you can check that you're exempt. But there are only a few types of exemptions. So if you don't fit into that and you think you should be exempt, talk to the Industrial Commission that they can kind of guide you on the right path.
Those very limited exemptions are listed on the portal. I believe, are they on the paper form as well? Yeah. Okay. So again, just review. There's only 2 real exemptions. If you fit into those, fantastic. If not, you will need to provide workers' compensation or proof of self-insurance.
It's not apply to everybody applying, but it might apply to you, so we'll go over it. If you do any type of solar work, so if you're applying for a CR11 and you install solar panels, you're going to need to submit a solar warranty to us. We have an example solar warranty on our website. It's in the forms page. You could just look at that example, fill it in to be applicable to your company, and then submit that with your application. If you need to cancel an existing license you have for whatever reason, you could submit a license cancellation form to us, and there is an option to have us not cancel that existing license until we issue your new license. So if you want to do that, make sure you check that box. You can inactivate an existing license that you have, or maybe your qualifying party has their own license they won't be using for a period of time. You could submit that inactivation with the new app. And then if your qualifying party needs to disassociate from a license that they're on already, submit that notice of disassociation with the application as well. Okay, so just to summarize what we talked about and go over those common deficiencies, so hopefully you don't have them with your application. Make sure that your qualifying party is giving detailed experience that is applicable to the classification being applied for. Make sure that if it's a dual license, that you specify that they or that you have both commercial and residential experience. Make sure you're giving the years required. If you're applying for a license with 4 years of experience, make sure you're showing that time frame on there so we can see that you have 4 years of experience. Give us a reference that's not on the application. For the bond, primarily this is with surety bonds, with the bond form being filled out incorrectly. Make sure your company name is correct and that the DBA is listed if you have one, that the penal sums are broken out, and that your authorized representative signs the bond. Government issued ID, make sure that everyone on the application submits this and that their IDs aren't expired. For testing, make sure either your out-of-state waivers are complete if that's what you're using, or if you're submitting testing, make sure that the testing is no more than 2 years old. And background checks, make sure that everyone on the application submits a background check and that those background checks were taken within 90 days or sooner. And again, we have that background check link on our website. Make sure you use that background check. It's through First Advantage. We don't accept background checks from other companies. This is directly for the registrar. Okay. And then each application has an application fee. So if you're applying for multiple licenses, that would be a separate application for each license with its own fees. It's broken down by classification type. And then there is a application fee. It's basically a processing and review fee. This is not refundable if for whatever reason you ask to withdraw your application or we return your application. We have license fees, which go towards the 2 years that the license will be in effect. It will need to be renewed after 2 years. And then if you're a residential or dual contractor, you do need to pay into the recovery fund. That's a form of consumer protection that the agency has. And then that last column totals that. I talked about applications being withdrawn or returned. If that does happen, you will get your license fee and your recovery fund fees back, but not that application fee.
Yeah, and just to talk a little bit about the recovery fund, it is it is, as Marley said, a form of consumer protection. If something happens to you in the middle of the job, or if you fail to actually perform in a workmanship manner, then that fund can assist the homeowner in either completing or fixing or repairing the project. The recovery fund, again, you pay into it whenever you get your license, and you pay into it on renewal if you are a residential or dual licensee. And the payout amounts are up to $30,000 per property, up to $200,000 per license. So it's one of the selling points for a consumer to use a licensed contractor, is that, hey, if anything goes wrong with me or the job, know that this fund exists as a form of protection for you.
Okay, so once you've submitted your application, there are some timeframes that kick in for us to review your application. So our agency has 60 calendar days to do an overall review. Those first 20 days are an administrative review. The last 40 days can be for a substantive review. Substantive review would be for reviewing complaints or felonies, stuff like that. I would recommend maintaining open communication with your application reviewer. Each application is assigned to a reviewer. They'll be doing the review. They'll be issuing deficiency letters. They're your point of contact if you have questions about how to resolve a deficiency, the status of the application. They're available by email and phone. So get to know that person, communicate with them if you have any questions about your application. Make sure you respond to requests for deficiencies. Keep your reviewer updated on what's going on with those deficiencies. You know, if you're working on getting a new bond, let them know so we know that that's coming soon. And then once your reviewer has everything they need, they send that to final review. And either Jacqueline and I or I will do a final review of that and approve it if it's good to go, or if we find a correction that the reviewer missed, that will go back to them and they will be in contact with you about that final item that's needed.
Yeah, and I can tell you, so basically we have 60 days to issue a license after you submit it to us. That's 20 days to review it to make sure it's complete, 40 days, 40 additional days to make sure that the content is what we need. I can tell you that as of today, we are issuing licenses in about 19 days. So in about a third of the time that we're allowed is what we're issuing. I can tell you, thanks to the pandemic, we asked for an executive order to allow waiver of examinations for issuing a provisional license. So we were issuing a provisional license that had lasted or lived for 6 months, and in that 6 months, you had to actually get the exam. We had to do this because our exam vendor actually closed their storefronts, and we were not able to get you in to take the exam. That, of course, caused a significant increase in the number of applications we received. So we're still recovering from that, but I can tell you that wonderfully enough, we're down to about 19 days to issue a license. Even if it's not complete, that average includes deficient applications. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. Think about it, less than 3 weeks. So Marley, thank you very much. What's next? We're gonna again send out an email probably the end of this week, beginning of next week, and that email will include a survey. We want your feedback. Is this format helpful? Is the content helpful? Again, you know our hope. It's that we're preparing you for how to avoid deficiencies and how to be comfortable applying for a license. We will also send you the YouTube link that is of this recording. A resource sheet, which will include the contact information for all of us on the call, and then a reminder. So what we are asking, if you're using the portal or the paper form, there will be a section near the authorized representative portion of the application where you can indicate whether you used or whether you attended this applicant seminar. Obviously you did. Please indicate yes. It's our way of tracking whether this is actually a helpful tool for us to use. This is only, I think, Marley, our fourth one or third one that we've done. So it's really important to us that you do mark that so that we can know whether this is a useful time for you as well as for us. So now we are to the questions, and we're happy to field them, whether you unmute yourself or whether you continue to use the chat function. And Jesse just put our contact information there again for you if you need it. Otherwise, you're welcome to jump off. We appreciate you attending. I can tell you though, some of the questions that come in end up being more helpful discussions than anything that we actually present. We think you might want to know about. So we invite you to stay, invite you to get off to work, but happy to help any way we can.
Yes, I got a question.
Yes, Gilbert.
Yeah, so going back to living out of state, and then planning on moving out to Arizona, and then trying to transfer my license and also apply for a general contractor license. So with residential remodeling, I know that I've seen and kind of updated myself on what types of licenses are needed out there. But with the residential license, does one need to get specific license for, like, example, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and all that? And I know you talked about an exemption, that the general contractor license would cover. But does the general contractor license, does it? Do you still have to sub out those trades, or is there one that you can apply for everything?
No, we do not have a universal license in Arizona. You would have to, as you said, you would get the general contractor's license, and then you would get a electrical license if that's what you wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah, we do break the classifications down in that manner. The general contractor license is allowed to do, depending on which level of general contractor you apply for, it's allowed to do anything in a structure, build a structure, except for electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and pools and boilers.
Okay, so then basically, these other types of licenses would be in addition to the general contractor license.
They would either be in addition to, or you could subcontract through that.
Subcontract.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and as far as I know, you talked and you touched a little bit on requirements, experience. So with the general contractor license, as far as for residential, for projects under 2 million, what type of experience are you guys looking for as far to acquire that type of license?
Marley?
Yeah. So for the B residential license, it kind of sounds like that's what you're looking at.
Yeah.
That license can build homes from the ground up. So that is ideally what we're looking for. But each application is reviewed case by case. If you've done a lot of casitas or smaller ground up builds, we would consider that extensive remodeling. So kind of framing, roofing, for whatever reason, if there was a fire and you're doing a partial rebuild, we would consider that. But ideally, we're looking for ground up kind of new build experience or extensive remodeling of residential structures.
Okay. And then being, out of state, could that process be started while I reside in a different state, or do I need to kind of be working with a company already, or partnered up or invested in a company?
Yeah, no, you would absolutely not need to be in state. Marley can correct me, but actually just Kelly can correct me because I used the wrong terminology. It is not a authorization or foreign authorization to work in the state that you would obtain from CorpCom, but it's something similar to that. Joe, are you on still?
Yes, sir.
What is it that he would need to do through CorpCom? Although obviously we would recommend that you call CorpCom, but we are familiar.
Yeah, I would call them just to be sure, because they do tend to change the names of their documents over there a little bit. But the foreign authorization to perform work is the description for it, whatever the actual form is. If you give me a minute, I can see if I can locate it for you.
All right.
Okay.
And then Marley, if you had additional information after that.
No, I was going to say, if you're applying as, again, LLC or corporation, contact Corporation Commission to get that set up. But yes, you don't need to be residing here when you apply.
Okay, and then if you know the people I'm talking to, I'm kind of trying to partner up with. I think it's an LLC, if I'm not mistaken. But would I need to be a owner or have some sort of ownership to be able to apply, or just like a qualified person, as you guys were referring to?
Up to you and then and your partners and how you want to structure that ownership. Um, if you're just applying by yourself as the qualifier, you'd also be the authorized representative, and we'd want to see that you have ownership. But if you have other people you're applying with, if they are the owners, they could apply. You could all apply. They're the owners. You're just the qualifying party. Yeah, you could do that. It's kind of up to you how you want to structure that.
Gotcha. Okay, I gotcha. Okay.
Marley, could you go into a little bit of the 25% ownership with qualifying party on multiple licenses?
Yes. So for anyone out there, if you are thinking about being on two different entities, so maybe there's an LLC that you're the qualifying party on with your brother and you have a sole proprietorship, it's just you and you're also the qualifying party. For that to happen, there needs to be common ownership of 25% or more between those two entities. So you could either be added to that first entity with 25% ownership, and we could see there's that common ownership. That is in statute that requires that we confirm that. And that can only apply to two entities. So you can't be on 3, 4, or 5 different entities as the qualifying party. It's 2 maximum, and there has to be that common ownership of 25% or more. If you just have your one entity that you're on, and you can apply for licenses under that entity, and you can be qualifying party on all those licenses. This just kicks in when we're talking about 2 entities.
All right, thank you.
And otherwise, Gilbert, just to follow back up, Joe's totally put the links in the chat for you. Marley, from Diana, if you're an LLC and member managed, but only one member will actively work on site, will workers' comp be required?
Yeah, so Diana, I would refer you to the Industrial Commission to get a definitive answer on that. From what I've seen, yes, I haven't seen that there's a type of exemption for someone not working on site, but reach out to the Industrial Commission to get a definitive answer.
Yeah, the 2 exemptions that I've seen are it's a sole proprietor and you are the only employee, or it is informal partnership and you're the only employee again.
Yeah, and then single member LLC.
Yeah. So those are the 2 exemptions that we know of, but really workers' compensation law is so intricate. We're going to point you every time to Industrial Commission to get a definitive answer. Cool. Okay. We're happy to stay the extra 5 minutes. I want to thank everyone for attending. Just remind you, check your email. We're sending out this recording as well as the survey and the reminder to click that you attended. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. Any of us are happy to get you to the right person to answer or answer your questions that you may have. Otherwise, good luck. Hope to have you as a licensed contractor in the state of Arizona soon.
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm mostly do a lot of flooring work, and I'll be applying for the R8, but I also do some trim work like baseboard, crown molding, like feature walls. Would that fall under the R8, or would I? And if it doesn't, do I need to apply for 2 licenses or?
Yeah. Sean, we can talk more specifically about what you do. But it sounds like you would need 2 licenses, or you could look at getting a remodeling license. Like we have the CR61, which allows remodeling of $50,000 or less, which would allow you to do multiple trades if you only want to get 1 license.
Okay.
If it's just baseboards you do, I would need to research that further, but that might be allowed under the 8. But you talked about a feature wall. That makes me think that you might need 2 licenses to do that, or the remodeling.
I was tracking right along with you, Marley. I was like, baseboards, that's ancillary, but then you went on to the feature wall, and I agree. Probably the 61 would be your best bet. But talk to Marley further, and she can actually understand what you're doing exactly.
Okay, so the flooring would fall under the 61 though.
It would. Yep.
Okay.
It's what's the limit on it, Marley? $50,000.
$50,000 per project.
Yeah. So it's any of the same general contractor type things, except you can't subcontract, right? Maybe you can subcontract.
You can subcontract to some. I think it's written out in statute, but yes, not as broad as the general.
Yeah, it's not as broad, but either way, you cannot do the same things. You cannot do electrical, plumbing, HVAC, boiler, full repair, but it does allow you to do the majority of what you're probably thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
And Jesse just put the scope in the chat for you. For projects of 50,000 or less, including labor and materials, this classification allows the licensee to perform all general remodeling, additions, replacements, and repairs to existing structures. Work related to electrical, plumbing, air, boilers must be subcontracted to an appropriately licensed contractor. Cool. Thanks for your question, Sean.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right.
One more question.
Yeah.
One more question. Is there like so that's for the residential. Is there a commercial version of that?
So you would, if you're interested in both, you would want to just get the CR61. That is a dual license classification for that. And it's, is the commercial higher, Jesse or Marley? No, they're both still 50,000 or less. So yeah, that would be the equivalent as what you want if you want to do both commercial and residential, or just small TI work, very small TI work.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. All right. I hate to end it right on time, but I do have a meeting at noon, so I've got to run. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.